Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. In this podcast, I will address the subject of policing. Let me begin by saying that I have nothing against police officers as individuals. In fact, my neighbor across the street, well, really across the path, is a retired police sergeant, and he is a very honorable man. I have a great deal of respect for him. I supported him when he was elected as president of the Homeowners Association, the HOA, and he is now the treasurer, and he's doing a very good job in that job as well. The previous board was somewhat problematic. I'll leave it at that, but say that the current board is doing a much better job, and much of it is due to the work of this retired police sergeant right across the path from me. I've also previously had a next door neighbor back when I lived in Kansas who was a retired police officer. He and I became relatively good friends. We got to know each other because there was a power outage, and we both were standing outside wondering what had happened. And we got into a conversation, and I found that he was a police officer, and he found that I was a college professor, and we became friends as a result of that. So nothing that I'm saying is directed against particular police officers. I treat everyone the same. Doesn't matter who they are. I was once having a conversation with a student of mine who was an anarchist. And he was a student of mine in an afternoon class, so I had no class right after that one. And sometimes we would sit in the class for a couple of hours, literally just talking about stuff, basically about anarchism or his version of anarchism, which is insurrectionary anarchism, and my version of Marxism. And we had a really nice conversation. We really enjoyed chatting with each other. We didn't always agree, but it was a pleasant conversation. The one area that we disagreed on is that he personalized his view of the police, which is something that I never did. He said at one point that he wanted to take a particular course, and I told him, well, I am not personally familiar with it, but the guy whose office is right next to this class, who is the chair of the criminal justice department and also a retired police officer and a very nice guy. If you speak to him, he can give you extensive guidance and tell you exactly what to do. This student of mine refused in a polite way, but refused to speak with him. He said, no, I'm not going to speak with some damn police officer. I thought that was unfortunate because that's not the way that I look at people. To me, I treat everyone exactly the same. I said that to him. I said, look, when I speak with you, when I speak with the president of the college, when I speak with the vice president for academic affairs, who happens to be a good friend of mine, when I speak with the dean of the division, doesn't matter. I speak to everyone in exactly the same way, students, professors, and administrators. And I found that as long as I do that, and I'm nice to people, it's held me in good stead. But he did not feel that way. He was so opposed to authority in principle that he would not speak with this chair of the criminal justice department, who I think could really have helped him and directed him to go into a course that he would have liked. But regardless, that was his decision. So again, my point is not to criticize police officers. I realize that there are good ones and there are bad ones. My problem is not with necessarily individual police officers. My problem is with the system of policing and how it works, particularly in the United States, because that's the place that I am most familiar with, but also in other countries around the world as well. I should say, in addition to that, that my view of policing is novel, I think. I have never heard anybody else express it. Maybe other people have, and I just haven't come across it. But in my experience, I have developed a rather original approach to reforming, maybe revolutionizing is a better term, the police system that exists not only in the US, but perhaps even throughout the world. And I hope that it is someday implemented, or at least something close to it. Okay, so let me get into what my proposal is. First, I have always been angered whenever there is an incident of police behaving badly. And there are lots of examples of that, especially with people of color. In fact, the reason why Black Lives Matter BLM started was because 3 women, all of whom had their husbands who were innocent, killed by police officers, and they were all African American, decided that they would start a Twitter, now X, hashtag called BLM, or Black Lives Matter. Eventually, Black Lives Matter became a website, and it soon developed into a social movement. So there is a long history of police abusing their authority, especially when it comes to African Americans, but not exclusively. I mean, I have had a couple of times, not that many, when police have been rude to me. I mean, that's not a big deal, is it? I mean, a lot of people are rude to each other. One time I saw this police officer standing outside in the street. He was by himself, and I wasn't sure why he was there. So I walked up to him and figured I'd start a conversation with him, which I ordinarily do with police officers or anybody else. And he screamed profanities at me and told me to get away from him. I debated what to do in the moment, whether to ask for his badge number or whether to walk away. I decided that I simply did not have the energy to pursue it. So I walked away. At times I have regretted that, but more often than not, I'm happy that I did that because I did not want to get into a protracted battle with either a single police officer or perhaps an entire police department. He may have just gotten up on the wrong side of the bed that morning, who knows? But he was really, really nasty to me, and I don't know why. There was one other incident where a police officer came by because my car had stopped working and I needed it to be towed. And for some reason, he was really angry at me that my car stopped working. I was thinking to myself, hasn't this guy's car ever stopped working? I mean, why is he angry at me? I asked him, I said, do you have a number for a company that could tow my car? And that even angered him more. So, I mean, he did give me the number, but he was not particularly happy about it. And I still, to this day, again, cannot figure out why he did that. But then again, for the most part, my own personal interactions with police officers as somebody who benefits from white privilege, although as an Ashkenazi Jew, I define myself as a brown person of color. I have not had that many bad experiences with police officers. The same cannot be said for many African Americans I have known over the years, one of whom was killed by a police officer for refusing to give up his seat at a basketball game. That was in South Carolina back in the early 1970s. So here is my proposal. First, there is a concept which has been developed and formulated and advocated by many police departments called community policing. I don't like community policing. Maybe it's better than what exists in most places now. I'm not qualified to judge whether it is better. But since I am a revolutionary communist, not a reformist, the fact that it may or may not be better is not particularly attractive to me. In case you don't know what community policing is, it's based on the assumption that police officers should get to know members of their community, should even live in their neighborhoods, should attend events, kind of like I guess some meteorologists do, go to school events and begin talking with kids, talking with the community, become trusted members of the community. That's community policing, basically where police officers feel that they are a part of the community and other residents of the community view police officers as being their friends. Again, I have no idea if that will be better than what exists now. It might not, but that is not what I support. Instead, what I support is something that I guess could be seen as quite radical. I support something that might be called community-run policing, although I would not want to use the term policing. Instead, maybe something like public affairs or community protection, something along that line, getting away from the notion of a police force. Because police, sadly, the way the system has developed, at least in the US, have become a kind of paramilitary system where they have military ranks like sergeant and captain. And I think what that does is that creates a kind of adversarial approach by the police officers to the communities that they are supposed to serve. Also, police unions. I hate police unions, and I am a guy who supports unions. I'm a pro-union guy from a pro-union family. Both of my parents were union members. My father was a member of the only communist union to have ever existed in the United States. And I'm not talking about the Wobblies, because they were not communist, they were syndicalist. This was a communist union in New York City that at one time was called District 65 of the AFL-CIO. Back in the 1950s, during the Army McCarthy hearings, there was a petition which was produced by the AFL-CIO and was distributed to all the districts, the district union members of that union of the AFL-CIO. And District 65, also known as the Distributive Workers Union refused to sign it. They refused. As a result of that, they were kicked out of the AFL-CIO. In my opinion, that is the best thing that could possibly have happened to District 65 or the Distributive Workers Union. It was better for that union to be independent than to be connected with an essentially conservative union, which the AFL-CIO was and still remains conservative. My father loved that union. He was a dedicated union member, really dedicated. He looked forward to serving his union. He actually worked for his union. I'm not going to get into specifics as to what he did. I will just say that he worked for the Distributive Workers Union while he was working. And he always loved doing that. It was always a pleasure for him to do that. I myself, when I worked, was a member of the National Education Association, which I guess could be considered a kind of progressive union. Definitely not communist, but I joined it. It was the union that represented the college where I worked, the faculty at our college, and so I saw no reason not to join it. Where I was in the Midwest, there were a lot of anti-union faculty. About half of the faculty were anti-union, and they refused to join the NEA, the National Education Association. Since Kansas, like much of the South and Midwest, is an open shop state, which means that you do not have to be a member of the union to work in a company, which gives a union less bargaining power. They could do that. We still had some bargaining power, but that bargaining power was limited to negotiating contracts, annual contracts. That's all that we had the authority to do. We could not, for example, organize a strike. Well, we could, but we'd be breaking the law, and I suppose we would be arrested, maybe, if we did that. So I like unions. I have nothing against unions. So when I express my opposition to police unions, it is not because I am opposed to unions. I am simply opposed to unions in what is currently called the police, or what I would prefer to be called something like public safety. Why? Well, because unions, police unions, have a long history in the US of protecting police officers from charges of abuse. When police officers have engaged in really, really horrendous acts or accused of doing that, the unions were so powerful in many parts of the US, but they were successfully able to prevent the members of their union, the police officers, from being prosecuted. Plus, the police officers and the prosecutors were often friends, and friends generally do not prosecute friends. So it was a kind of, I guess you could call it a double whammy, but it worked to the advantage, and it still works, to the advantage of police officers. Till this day, a majority of murders or alleged murders that are committed by police officers are not prosecuted. And a majority of police officers who are prosecuted are acquitted. That's for a variety of reasons, but one of them does not necessarily relate to the unions, but it relates to public attitudes toward police. Most Americans, I would say sadly, have a very positive view of American policing and are very reluctant, even when presented with extremely strong evidence, to convict a police officer. And so a lot of police officers get away scot-free. Before there were police cams, police officers would commonly place weapons on the bodies of people they had killed and would say, well, I had to kill this person. This person was threatening to kill me. We know that even more now because some police officers have tried to get away with doing that even with the police cams. And as a result, in many cases, not all, but in many cases, those police officers have been convicted. I can only imagine how many police officers have committed those atrocious acts in the past and simply got away scot-free because there were no cameras to record what they had done. So instead of community policing and instead of the militarized police system that we have right now in the US, what I would suggest is community-run policing, or again, better, community-run public safety. Here's what I mean by that. And I realize this is a radical proposal, so no one needs to tell me, but I think it's good, but it certainly would be a significant change from what exists right now. What I would like to see is the end of ranks. First, no more ranks, no more police ranks. Second, no more police departments in the way they are currently constructed, where the police chief, there would be no more police chiefs, that's a rank, or a captain, which is also a rank, would have authority over the police. Instead, the police or public safety officers would be entirely supervised by the community or even neighborhood, preferably, which they serve. And that is it. That is it. And once a public safety officer commits an offense, there would be an investigation. And if the public safety officer is found to be complicit or guilty, not only would that police officer be fired from that particular police department, but that police officer or public safety officer could not appeal that decision. That's the really controversial part, I guess. No appeals would be permitted. In addition, that police officer or public safety officer would be placed on a watch list of public safety officers who have been fired for engaging in police brutality or some other type of offense. And based upon that, no other public safety department in the United States could hire that person to work in their public safety department. That is my proposal. Now, again, I realize that what I said is very radical, but I think that given the horrendous record of many, not all, police officers engaging in these atrocious acts, especially against people of color, and even more especially against African Americans, that is the least that we can do. But instead, when I have watched a lot of news programs following an incident where a police officer killed a civilian. The usual response by the police officer serving, I guess, as a police analyst of some sort would be, well, that person was simply a bad apple. How many times have you heard that? The bad apples approach to policing. We need to get rid of all the bad apples, and then policing will be good. The problem is not a few bad apples. The problem is structural or institutional, meaning rather than focusing on individuals and turning the situation into a problem which can be resolved on the level of firing individual police officers. We have to look at the way in which police departments are organized in a very authoritarian and military manner. Also, we need to look at the types of people who are commonly hired to be police officers. There have been studies on this subject. One study that I read found that a majority of police officers were high school bullies. That is the last kind of person that you want on a police or public safety division. And yet that is precisely the typical person who was hired by them. What do you expect when you hire a person like that to work in your police department? If a person was a high school bully, wouldn't you predict that that person will continue to be a bully once that person is a police officer? I think the answer is clearly yes. So it's not a few bad apples. The problem, again, is structural and institutional, meaning we need to completely demolish policing in its present form, demolish it from the bottom on up, and then recreate an entirely new system of public safety, which is devoid of many of those problems and contradictions, one which looks at individuals and only hires people of the highest moral caliber, and where police officers or public safety officers know that if they commit a single act of police brutality, not only will they be fired from that job, but they can't go next door to a neighborhood around the corner and apply for a job there, which is what frequently happens, as many of you probably know. That will be the end of their career in policing. Now, if you are thinking, that sounds unfair, maybe it is unfair, but at least what it would do is it would attract only the highest caliber people to be public safety officers. You would not find bullies applying for the job. Only moral, ethical, upstanding individuals will have the desire to become public safety officers because they know that unless they are like that they simply will not last. And that the neighborhood or some unit of the neighborhood will have the sole authority to hire and fire public safety officers. No police chiefs anymore. No police unions anymore. And again, that is why I started out this podcast by pointing out that I'm a pro-union guy, and I come from a pro-union family. And honestly, I support unions for every single profession and occupation except policing. I do not think that unions should exist for policing or as a compromise. If there are unions, those unions should only have the ability to negotiate contracts, not to defend police officers from charges of abuse. They would simply not have that power. For the time being, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.